We resume in the Heart Home gym, where Maylene has just thrown down the gauntlet with Paul, challenging him to a full battle. Shrugging, the purple-haired boy sneers that she's not worth the effort, but if it'll shut her up, he'll accept this challenge. Maylene grins he'll be eating those words soon, saying they can go find a battlefield right now. However, Reggie stops her, saying that wouldn't be fair to Paul's Pokemon, since they've already battled today, and by the looks of Maylene's Meditite when he came to get her and Ash, so it. Better let them all rest tonight and battle fresh tomorrow. Paul and Maylene both begrudgingly accept, though for very different reasons, and so go their separate ways with a promise to meet up in the morning and truly prove whose style is superior. That evening over dinner, Ash and Reggie ask Paul if he's given any thought to how he's going to beat Maylene in the morning. Paul nods, saying he's going to use the same strategy he used against Fantina, and Reggie asks if he thinks that'll be enough to carry him through, reminding Paul that he himself said it wouldn't work 3 times against Fantina. Paul agrees, though points out a key difference in Maylene and Fantina's style. Fantina is all about strategy, so using the same trick against her would only give the gym leader a chance to deconstruct it. On the other hand, Maylene is a blunt instrument, liable to throw herself against a brick wall the same way every time, meaning that with her Pokemon, something that works against one should work against all of them. Ash isn't so sure, and so tells his brother about his own battle with Maylene. Paul listens, smart enough not to dismiss potentially valuable information, but when Ash is done, he tells him that this doesn't change anything. Ash, frowning a little, asks why not, and Paul explains that Maylene only posed a challenge to him because he's also a blunt instrument. He then instructs his twin to watch his battle carefully tomorrow, since maybe it will finally get it through Ash's thick skull to let go of several of his own failings as a trainer when he sees what they cost Maylene. With this enigmatic statement, he departs to do some last-minute training with his team, while Reggie says he should go make a few calls, including telling his client he'll be a little late. This leaves Ash all alone, and in the silence he asks himself for the first time what it will mean if Paul is right, and Maylene is easily defeated tomorrow. The next morning dawns bright and early, and as promised, Ash, Paul, Reggie and Maylene meet in the battlefield behind the Pokemon Center for Paul and Maylene's full battle. When they arrive, they see another man waiting for them with a large scoreboard set up behind him. Reggie explains that last night he requested a referee so they could simulate what an official league battle would be like, and Paul nods, saying he supposes that makes sense. Maylene, however, remains silent, her entire attention on Paul. When they are both ready, the referee tells them this will be a full battle, with both trainers being able to substitute freely and no time limit being in place. He then bids them both to bring out their first Pokemon. In unison, Paul and Maylene lob their balls, bringing forth Meditite and Mismagius. Seeing the immediate type disadvantage, Maylene grimaces, but Paul doesn't give Maylene a chance to retreat, opening the battle with a mean look. Mismagius' eyes flash red, and at once a red spectral eye forms on Meditite's forehead, symbolizing its inability to escape. Even though escape is now impossible, Maylene stays strong, declaring that Paul's just made things simpler, since now the only way is forward. She then calls for a Thunder Punch, and as lightning crackles around Meditite's fists, it lunges forth at Mismagius. However, the ghost type merely floats out of the way before Paul calmly orders a Perish song. A haunting sound then fills the area, with Ash and Reggie each feeling a chill run down their spine as ethereal numbers appear over both Mismagius and Meditite. Ash and Maylene are evidently unfamiliar with this move, so Reggie explains, telling them that it's a countdown, and when the number hits 0, both Pokemon will faint. This unnerves Maylene, though she takes some small comfort in the fact that Paul's Pokemon will go down too. However, if Meditite is fated to faint, she would rather at least get a knockout first, and so orders another Thunder Punch. Once more Meditite leaps at Mismagius, but Paul seems unfazed, waiting until Meditite is closer before calling for a Hypnosis. Mismagius' eyes flash again, as Ash remembers that this is the move it used against him and Paul on the way to Hearthome, and wonders if Meditite will have just as much trouble resisting it as they did. Unfortunately for Maylene, the answer is yes, as Meditite crashes to the ground without having laid a finger on Mismagius. And to make matters worse, the counter is still slowly ticking down. However, here Paul does something surprising, recalling Mismagius despite it having taken no damage so far. As its portrait dims on the scoreboard, Paul reveals his second Pokemon, Stantler. Ash wonders why his brother would do this, but the answer quickly becomes clear when Paul has it use Nightmare on the defenseless Meditite. On the ground, the fighting monkey writhes, while behind it Maylene pleads for it to wake up. Alas, these pleas fall on deaf ears, as moments later, Meditite's eyes become spirals under the force of their super effective move. Recalling her defeated Pokemon, Maylene next brings out her Breloom, as Paul returns Stantler and brings Miss Magus back out, who no longer carries its spectral counter. He then wastes no time calling for a mean look and repeating the cycle. As Breloom fires off bullet seeds, Miss Magus easily avoids these by vanishing in a way reminiscent of Fantina's fighting style, before reappearing and once more using Perish Song to put this match on a timer. Maylene goes pale, as Paul turns to Ash, asking if he finally understands what he meant last night. Like it or not, Ash does, and feels deeply conflicted about it. Paul is his brother and he loves him, but he doesn't like the new Paul, and had been secretly hoping a win by Maylene might be enough to snap him back to himself. Maylene, however, is not ready to give up yet, and so with a yell to reinvigorate her warrior spirit, calls for Breloom to use Rock Tomb. However, once more Miss Magus simply flies up, rendering the attack an utter waste of time, before using Hypnosis to trap Breloom just like it did Meditite. Unsurprisingly, Paul's next move is to swap Miss Magus for Stantler, and inflict terrible nightmares upon the Mushroom Fighter, and so this match ends just like the first one, with the only difference being that it is the timer running out that takes Breloom, rather than the nightmares. And just like that, 1/3 of Maylene's team is defeated without Paul's Pokemon taking a single injury. Victory looks all but impossible for Maylene, and Paul knows it, jeeringly asking if she just wants to stop wasting both their time and give up already. Maylene, however, refuses, saying that's the great thing about Pokemon battles. They're not over until they're over, since the power of a trainer and Pokemon's bond can overcome anything. Paul just shrugs that if she insists, he won't object to using her last 4 Pokemon as punching bags, before instructing her to bring out her third Pokemon. That Pokemon, as it turns out, is Tyrogue, and when it appears, the baby pugilist does a bit of shadow boxing to show its eagerness for battle. Paul is unmoved, and so returns Miss Magus to the field, calling for Mean Look for a third time. This connects, and as with its predecessors, a spectral red eye appears on Tyrogue's forehead. However, when he moves into the next stage of his combo with Perish Song, Maylene has a counter, calling for Round. Taking a deep breath, Tyrogue begins to sing, or at least that is what everyone assumes it is doing, since in truth it more closely resembles caterwauling. Though it does have one saving grace, that it is loud enough to drown out Miss Magus's Perish Song and prevent the spectral timers from appearing. Grinning, Maylene taunts that it looks like things aren't as hopeless as Paul thought, but the boy merely grits his teeth, saying his strategy can adapt, as he tells Miss Magus to use Hypnosis and try Perish Song again when Tyrogue is asleep. Miss Magus nods, and so as Maylene tells Tyrogue to charge in for a thief attack, the ghost's eyes flash. Looking up, Tyrogue and Miss Magus make eye contact, and Miss Magus grins, knowing there's no escape now. However, instead of drooping, Tyrogue's eyes are light with purpose, and it keeps running forth, before slamming an umbral uppercut into Miss Magus's chin. This sends Paul's Pokemon flying, and the purple-haired boy wonders how this is possible when he saw Hypnosis connect. Reggie, recognizing the question in his little brother's eyes, asks Maylene if he would be correct in assuming that her Tyrogue's ability is Vital Spirit. Maylene nods, and so Reggie tells Paul that this prevents Tyrogue from falling asleep, thus neutralizing 3 links in his seemingly invincible combo chain. However, Paul has bigger problems, as buoyed by this comeback, Maylene has Tyrogue follow Miss Magus into the air, and before the ghost can find its bearings, deliver a second super effective thief, which drives it into the ground, causing a dust cloud to rise up around it. Touching down, Tyrogue feels the spectral red eye on its forehead finally fade, and seeing this, it comes as no shock to Paul when moments later the dust settles to reveal that Miss Magus is unconscious. Scowling that being beaten by a baby is pathetic, Paul withdraws Miss Magus, and in its place sends in Fearow, trusting that its flying typing will be more than enough to handle Tyrogue. Looking to her friend, Maylene asks if it wants to keep fighting, and the small fighting type fist pumps, clearly riding the high of its last victory. Maylene acknowledges this, and so calls for a focus energy to really get itself ready for the battle ahead, but Paul has no intention of letting it develop any form of advantage, and so orders an aerial ace, Swooping down, Furo plunges its beak into Tyrogue's stomach, sending the small fighter rolling backwards. However, neither Maylene nor Tyrogue are willing to let this go unanswered, and so Maylene calls for a mega kick, which the baby fighter delivers with gusto, as it uses its prone position to push off with its hands and spring feet first into Furo's stomach for a critical hit. This makes the bird squawk in protest, but Paul simply snaps at it to keep going and use another aerial ace. Dutifully, Furo obeys, coming around for another pass, and so Maylene in turn calls for a repeat of Tyrogue's last move. Leaping up, Tyrogue executes a mega kick which slams into the side of Furo's face, just as Furo's beak drives itself into the underside of Tyrogue's chin. In unison they collapse under the weight of these attacks, but in the end only one of them can rise, and it is Furo, as back-to-back super effective moves are finally enough to put the spunky baby down for the count. Maylene smiles as she recalls Tyrogue, telling it that it fought like a champ and set their comeback in motion, before bringing out Heracross. To Paul's eye, this is an odd choice, as it is quad weak to flying. However, he won't look a gift ponytail in the mouth, and so orders another aerial ace, figuring this should take down the bug fighter in one blow. Unfortunately for Paul, this is exactly what Maylene was hoping for, and so calls for a Stone Edge, when Furo is too close to abort. Glistening stone shards circle Heracross, before firing at the bird, and at this range, each hits its mark, resulting in Furo falling from the sky and being declared unable to battle. From the sidelines, Ash can't help but be impressed by how quickly Maylene has turned the tide of this battle from an insurmountable obstacle into a minor disadvantage, with only one Pokemon separating her and Paul. Paul's third Pokemon is his Chimchar, with it cheering excitedly until Paul snaps at it to focus. He then calls for a Flame Wheel, and with a shriek of its own name, Chimchar belches a torrent of flames which it wraps itself in, tearing across the pitch towards Heracross. Maylene once more calls for a Stone Edge, but this time as the shards fly forth, the momentum of Flame Wheel allows Chimchar to evade each of them and deliver a super effective hit to Heracross's center mass. Then, to make things worse, as Heracross recoils, a pillar of flame bursts up all around it, signifying that it's been burned. Though it goes against her nature to run from a fight, Maylene knows it would be unfair to Heracross to ask it to keep going against such odds, and so brings out her Monferno in its place. Chimchar and Monferno square off, ready to fight fire with fire. That is until Paul recalls his unevolved ape and instead chooses Stantler for this fight. This doesn't bother Maylene, who calls for a close combat, causing Monferno to charge at the Bighorn Pokemon, while Paul has Stantler meet it with a Psy Shield bash. The two blows connect, but Paul's shield quickly proves superior, as it throws Monferno back for super effective damage. The purple-haired youth then calls for a repeat of the attack, and Maylene knows that with Monferno's lower defense, another Psy Shield bash could be devastating. However, Monferno does not seem to share her worries, instead pounding on its chest, as if daring Stantler. This gives the girl an idea, and so as Stantler barrels towards them, Maylene tells her starter to use Work Up. Paul sneers at this tactic, and so gives no change in his orders, watching as Stantler closes in on the fiery monkey. This proves to be a mistake, as at the very last second, Maylene has Monferno switch to Muck Punch, using the increased speed of its move to strike first. This, coupled with its enhanced strength from Work Up, is enough to shatter Stantler's Psy Shield bash, and deliver a super effective punch right to the deer's snout. Stantler whinnies in pain at this unexpected hit, and as Paul snaps at it to calm down, Maylene executes the second stage of her plan, another close combat. Already being in point-blank range, Monferno has no difficulty grappling Stantler, clambering onto its back and delivering a flurry of blows to its head, neck, and torso. The normal type tries frantically to buck its unwelcome rider off, but using its tail, Monferno is able to create a tether, which keeps it secured as it leaps off Stantler's back and swings wide to deliver a final flying kick to the Bighorn's jaw, knocking it out. Paul scowls as he is forced to return it too, saying its Psy Shield bash is still weak, while on the other side of the field, Maylene praises Monferno's guts. Nonetheless, she decides to sub it out as well, since between cutting its own defense twice and tanking that super effective Psy Shield bash, it's starting to fatigue. Paul's fifth Pokemon is Scyther, while after some consideration, Maylene returns her Heracross to the field. Sensing an easy win, Paul calls for acrobatics, and so the green insectoid's body takes on a faint bluish hue as it takes to the air, soaring overhead and circling Heracross. On Paul's command, Scyther then dive bombs Heracross for what should be a match-ending move, but at the same time, Heracross leaps upwards, locking its now glowing horn with one of Scyther's blades to create a stalemate. More shocking still, it then pushes forward, knocking Scyther's arm out of the way and driving its megahorn into the bug-flying type's thorax. As Scyther goes tumbling back, Heracross lands, only for its burn to flare up and injure it too. This tells Paul all he needs to know. This Heracross has guts as its ability, meaning that when Chimchar burned it, it made the bug infinitely more dangerous. Cursing the fire type, Paul knows that in this case, his best course of action will be hit and run tactics, in the hope that either Scyther's attacks will take Heracross out before it can make full use of its power, or the burn will. And so he sets to work, calling for another acrobatics. However, Maylene, now knowing that Heracross has the strength to surpass Scyther, is ready to go on the attack. Calling for Stone Edge once more, she has her Pokemon hurl the chunks of rock at its opponent, forcing Paul into an agility-powered retreat, as he comes to the realization that with them both possessing a quite effective move, this battle will truly be determined by who hits first. And so knowing that his only way to land that hit will be to get in close, Paul calls for one last acrobatics, as Scyther lunges forward. Manifesting a new Stone Edge, Heracross grabs a pair of shards like daggers, and leaps into the fray. The dueling bug types meet in mid-air, with scythes clashing with stone, as they come together and break apart in a series of brief skirmishes. Occasionally, Heracross's burn will flare up, but each injury only seems to make the fighting beetle more determined to win, as it swings with more and more ferocity. Eventually, this results in a stone dagger shattering during a clash with Scyther's claws. As the bladed tip spins high above them, Scyther capitalizes on this, by bringing both claws down on the side with the damaged dagger. Against both sides, the already cracked stone disintegrates into silt, leaving Heracross vulnerable to a finishing blow. Maylene urges Heracross to save itself and get away from Scyther, but Heracross is unwilling to let its trainer down, and knowing that it can't last much longer with this burn, it instead decides to marshal all its guts for one last all-out attack. Backing up, the two foes lock eyes, before leaping at each other, Scythe with both claws, and Heracross with a single stone shard clutched in both hands. This time they do not even seem to make contact, but as they slide past each other like dueling samurai, the air is thick with finality. Then in unison, they collapse, as the round is declared a double knockout. Recalling their Pokemon, Paul and Maylene each weigh their options carefully, knowing they each have one Pokemon who has already seen battle, and one that is fresh. And despite their vast difference in style, both come to the same conclusion, calling forth their sixth Pokemon, Groddle for Paul, and Riolu for Maylene. Riolu has a similar excitable energy to Tyrogue and Paul's Chimchar, and this stands in stark contrast to Groddle, who much like its trainer exudes seriousness. As this battle of opposites begins, Paul realizes this match does not favor him, as Riolu promptly proves that its strength lies in its speed. Firing off a bevy of vacuum waves, it easily evades the razor leaves that are sent back at it, while unfortunately the same cannot be said for Groddle. Try as it might, the weighty turtle simply cannot avoid Riolu's attacks as quickly as it can dish them out, and so rather than allow his starter to take unnecessary damage, Paul recalls it, and brings Chimchar back out. Having learned from its last scolding, Chimchar gets right down to business, firing off an ember which strikes Riolu, causing the warrior dog to recoil in pain. Pressing this advantage, Paul has Chimchar close the distance with Flame Wheel. Rolling hard and fast, Chimchar bears down on Riolu, but Maylene is not out of tricks, and so calls for another vacuum wave. As the orb of vacuum collides with the layer of flame surrounding Chimchar, it begins to drink it up, drawing the flame in and immediately extinguishing them, since as a vacuum, it lacks the oxygen necessary for fire to exist. This rapidly changes the shape of the flame wheel, as almost half of it has suddenly ceased to exist, which in turn throws Chimchar off its rhythm, causing the little monkey to faceplant painfully at Riolu's feet. Unfortunately, this is not the end of Chimchar's woes, as before it can rise, Riolu uses a rock smash to swing a glowing fist, which drives the fire type into the air, where it is caught up in a follow-up vacuum wave, which leaves it worse for wear. Briefly, Paul wonders if another hit like that might be enough to activate Blaze, but as he looks at Chimchar, he realizes it would more likely just knock it out and put him at a disadvantage. Luckily, he still has one strategy left, one he developed last night, and this Riolu with its vacuum wave might be just the Pokemon to use it on. With a shout, Paul orders a dig, and at once Chimchar burrows underground. However, Maylene teases that he's getting desperate, as she tells Riolu to simply fire a vacuum wave down into the hole after Chimchar. Riolu dutifully does so, but instead of panicking, Paul smirks, and in a confident voice tells Maylene that she really didn't think that through, as moments later, Chimchar emerges from the hole directly underneath Riolu. Using its innate acrobatic abilities, Chimchar swings itself between Riolu's legs, before kicking it in the back, so that the dog tumbles face first into its own vacuum wave, just as it rises up into the open. In unison, Ash, Reggie, and Maylene all gasp that that was the counter snare, to which Paul nods, wordlessly telling his twin that while Ash created it, he has perfected it. He then has Chimchar leap up once more, dispelling Vacuum Wave with a scratch before wrapping Riolu in a bear hug and driving it into the ground with Flame Wheel. The hound dog howls in pain as it's dragged along the ground like a plow, but thankfully this piteous sound is short-lived, as when Chimchar ceases its onslaught, Riolu is deemed unable to battle. And just like that, Maylene is down to her last Pokemon, Monferno. The middle stage monkey appears to be a bit rested from its time off the battlefield, but it's abundantly clear that it does not have the stamina left for a war of attrition. In fact, on closer inspection, Maylene sees that a faint heat haze seems to be shimmering around her starter, as just below the surface, Monferno's skin is glowing red. Recognizing Monferno's blaze ability, Maylene calls for a flame wheel, and as it begins to spin towards Chimchar, Paul orders it to respond in kind. At once it is clear for all to see that Chimchar's flame wheel is smaller and weaker, and so when they clash, it does not take long at all for Chimchar to be knocked backwards and blown out of its flame wheel. However, unlike Maylene's Monferno, Chimchar is not rewarded with a blaze-powered attack boost. Instead, all it receives is unconsciousness, as it lands on its back. Calling it useless, Paul returns Chimchar to its ball, then like Maylene, brings forth his final Pokemon and starter, Groddle. Gritting his teeth at this disadvantageous matchup, Paul tells his partner to use Toxic, in the hope that this can wear away Monferno from afar. However, as the grass-type belches noxious ooze, Monferno simply uses Flame Wheel once more, the heat radiating from it being enough to evaporate the Toxic before it can make contact. It then slams headfirst into Groddle, sending the turtle skidding backwards with a yelp of pain. As Groddle forces itself to stay on its feet, a faint green aura begins to surround it, that being Overgrow. Now with its grass moves boosted, Paul decides to call for an Absorb, as Maylene, satisfied with the last few attempts, tells Monferno to wrap things up with one last Flame Wheel. Just like the last two times, Monferno dashes towards its opponent, though this time, two ethereal green tendrils lash out to stop it. Slamming into the front of the spinning ape, the tendrils begin to push Monferno back, but Monferno is unwilling to give any ground, and so simply pushes harder to try and overcome this new roadblock. And so a tug of war begins, with Monferno and Groddle taking turns to push the other back. All the while, their red and green auras respectively only grow larger. However, in the end, Groddle proves superior, as with a bellow, it pushes through the flames to knock Monferno out of Flame Wheel and wraps it tight within its grasp. Paul then demands that Groddle drink all of Monferno's vitality, an order which Groddle is happy to obey, as its own wounds slowly begin to heal. To its credit, Monferno fights valiantly to break free, but it seems that Absorb is simply too much, as before long its eyes close and its head lolls forward. Reggie's referee friend prepares to call the match in Paul's favor, but before he can speak, Maylene cries out, pleading with her partner to stay strong. This seems to awaken something within Monferno, as with a shriek, its eyes burst open, and a white light begins to engulf it. The power of evolution is enough to break away the tendrils of Absorb, and as Maylene's starter touches the ground, it lets out a cry of its new name, Infernape. Maylene whoops with delight at her partner's evolution, while Paul grits his teeth in frustration, telling Groddle to grab the monkey again and finish the job. Groddle dutifully attempts to do so, but this time Maylene and Infernape are ready, with Infernape using Mach Punch to leap from tendril to tendril, punching cleanly through them before they can get a grip. This allows it to close in on Groddle, who with its diminished speed cannot get away, and so when Infernape is upon its prey, it unleashes the largest flame wheel yet, driving Groddle into the dirt and rendering it unconscious. Up on the scoreboard, Paul's final team slot turns grey, and with it, Maylene is declared the winner of this full battle. Maylene and Infernape hug, with both cheering excitedly at their victory as it is a testament to their bond, while on his side of the field, Paul slumps to the ground in defeat. Seeing this, Maylene makes her way over to Paul and says she hopes he sees now that little compassion can go a long way, before offering him a hand up. Rudely, Paul slaps the hand away, saying that he doesn't want to hear it, before recalling his defeated Groddle and rising to his feet on his own. Ash and Reggie then join their brother, with Ash asking Paul if he's alright, while Reggie simply gives a consoling look. Brusquely, Paul says he's fine, before turning his back on all of them and heading inside to have his Pokemon healed. Knowing by now how much Paul values his space, the remaining Veilstone brothers then turn to Maylene and congratulate her on her win. Maylene grins that it was a tough fight, that's for sure, but together she and her Pokemon pals pulled through. She just wishes Paul could stop being such a jerk, since now she knows that not only is he a bad winner, but he's also a sore loser. Reggie appeasingly tells the pink-haired girl that though Paul's always hated to lose, he's just going through some stuff at the moment, and he hopes she'll be patient with him. Sighing, Maylene says that a jerk like Paul doesn't deserve a big brother as kind as Reggie, before bidding both him and Ash goodbye, and heading inside to get her own Pokemon healed. When Paul is done healing his Pokemon, Ash and Reggie are waiting for him, with both telling him that he fought his hardest and that's what matters. However, Paul doesn't see it that way, and just grunts in response, before saying that he needs to get back to training, since he's clearly been letting his Pokemon slack off too much. Wanting to keep an eye on Paul and make sure he doesn't take the wrong lesson from this encounter like he did with the battle against Brandon, Reggie suggests that if they want, he and Ash could join him in Floroma Town, that way he could help with their training. Ash is all for this idea, but Paul shrugs that it would just be out of their way, since they still have to earn their last 5 badges. Grinning, Reggie replies that he thought Paul might say that, but before making his decision, he should know that the person he's making his delivery to in Floroma Town is a gym leader. Ash pipes up that he thought Floroma didn't have a gym, but Reggie smiles that they don't, but this leader often uses the Floroma Meadow as a secret training ground. This lights a fire in both Ash and Paul's eyes, and from there it's not a hard sell to convince the boys to join him. Piling into Reggie's pickup truck, the brothers depart along Route 208 and 207 before taking an off-road shortcut the rest of the way. Though this part of the drive is turbulent, neither Ash nor Paul say a word of complaint, both having their minds squarely on the gym leader's secret training ground. For Ash, it's a chance to improve and work with his Pokemon, having had little chance to help Graveler and Luxray adapt to their new forms, while for Paul it is a place where he can redouble his efforts and ensure that nothing like what happened with Maylene ever happens again. Anger curdles within the purple-haired youth every time he thinks of the girl, and this serves as an excellent motivator, as that evening when they break to make camp, he immediately heads into the woods to train, pushing his team harder than he ever has before, the image of Maylene's idiotic grin burned into his mind, taunting him. When Paul hasn't returned to camp by midnight, Reggie seeks him out, warning that if he doesn't slow down, he'll wear his Pokemon out. But Paul retorts that with a mentality like that, he might as well quit now like Reggie did, before turning back to his Stantler and barking out to keep using Psyshort Bash until Chimchar can't break it. Knowing that this is Paul's pain and shame talking, Reggie doesn't rebuke his younger brother for this, but instead simply watches him train, making sure to provide the necessary care to the Pokemon when Paul isn't using them. It is dawn by the time Paul makes it back to camp, and from the dark shadows under his eyes, it is clear that he has been working all night and would have kept going had Reggie not insisted they get back on the road. The next night, Paul repeats the process, despite having barely slept during the day, and this time Ash comes with Reggie to watch Paul train. Coldly, Paul asks Ash what he's doing here, and Ash replies that he's here to talk. He knows Paul better than anyone, and he can see how much losing hurt him, but this isn't the way to get over that loss. What he needs to do now is rest like Reggie said, and when they get to Floroma Town, they'll train together, just like how training with Maylene helped him get over his loss to Fantina. Unfortunately, Ash only realizes his mistake when it's too late, as fury fills Paul's eyes at the mention of his rival, and in a livid voice he snarls that losers like Ash might need those sorts of crutches, but he and his Pokemon can get all the strength they need on their own. Ash tries to amend his prior statement, but Paul just snaps at him to get lost. At Reggie's nod, Ash departs, though not before muttering that it's a bit rich for Paul to call anyone a loser after yesterday, a claim which only sets Paul's jaw to clench as he returns to his intensive training. The twins do not speak again for the rest of the trip, and by mid-morning the next day, Reggie pulls up to Floroma Town. At once, Paul declares his intention to head to Floroma Meadow and challenge the gym leader, but Reggie tells Paul that he'll have to be patient, since before they can battle, he has to make his delivery. Paul, however, is in no mood to be slowed down, and so without another word leaps from the back of the truck and begins to march north towards the meadow. Frantically, Reggie calls for his brother to stop, clambering out after him, but the younger brother doesn't get far, as after a few steps he collapses. At this sight, Ash leaps up as well, and he and Reggie rush over to inspect Paul. When they reach their brother, Reggie sighs that it looks like he's succumbed to exhaustion from all that excess training. Ash asks what they should do, and Reggie responds that he's going to take Paul to a hospital so he can get him checked out by a doctor, but that means he needs Ash to complete his delivery for him. Ash promises to do just that, and so Reggie pulls a handheld device from his apron, tossing it to Ash and telling him to take it to the Valley Windworks, just off Route 205. Nodding, the youngest Valstone brother sprints off in that direction, while behind him Reggie loads the unconscious Paul back into his truck and drives off. Up above, storm clouds begin to gather, and the sound of rumbling thunder can be heard. But this does not deter Ash, who continues to run, even as thick raindrops pelt him. He can see the turbines of the windworks now, and as flashes of yellow burst into life in the distance, Ash has a feeling that whatever Reggie's device is, it's needed now more than ever. A few minutes later, Ash arrives at the Valley Windworks, and to his surprise, the source of the light is revealed to be an angry-looking Elekid, who is standing on the roof of the Windworks, firing electrical attacks down at a green-haired young man who is holding an unconscious winged Pokemon to his chest, clearly trying to shield it from any further damage. Looking up, the young man recognizes Ash's purple hair and asks if he's Reggie's brother. Ash nods and holds out the device, asking if he's the gym leader Reggie was meant to deliver this to. The young man in turn nods, saying that what Ash has there is an electrical decompressor, which is mostly used to siphon off an electric Pokemon's excess electricity to prevent electrical overload. He is then cut off by another violent burst of electricity from Elekid, forcing him to tackle Ash out of the way as a bolt of lightning cleaves through the ground right where the boy was standing. Grinning wryly, he then adds that he thinks Elekid knows what that is too, and doesn't want it anywhere near it. Ash asks why not, and the green-haired man replies that it seems Elekid has chosen to overcharge itself as a way to get stronger. Ever since moving into the Valley Windworks, it has continually fed off the power the turbines generate to increase its electricity, and has furiously fought off anyone who has tried to drive it away, including him. As a result, the workers here have been unable to produce the electricity necessary to power Floroma Town, and slowly homes, shops, and even essential services like hospitals have been suffering from power outages, which could become permanent if they can't stop Elekid from stealing all the electricity. Thinking of Paul, Ash vows that he will help, to which the gym leader thanks him, saying that he was almost able to defeat it until the rain came along to act as a further amplifier to Elekid's electric attacks. Ash nods his understanding, then hands his new friend the decompressor, telling him to use it when he's worn Elekid down a bit more. The green-haired man tells Ash to be careful, since between Elekid's seemingly infinite power supply and the rain advantage, he's not sure how he's going to be able to beat it. Ash, however, seems unconcerned, smiling that a friend recently taught him that no advantage is insurmountable, especially when you believe in your Pokemon. He then calls forth his Luxray, telling it to join Elekid on the roof and start absorbing all the electricity it can. Worriedly, the green-haired man points out that this will only drain the town's reserves twice as fast, but Ash tells him not to worry, since once Elekid is defeated, he'll make sure Luxray gives back twice as much as it's borrowed. Up on the roof, the two electric types glare at each other, as both begin to charge their internal batteries for the inevitable clash. Static electricity leaps between Elekid's spark plug horns, while Luxray's fur stands on end, and even Ash can feel the current as he climbs the fire escape to join his Pokemon. Then, like the heavens themselves have called for the battle to begin, lightning strikes between the Pokemon, as in unison they leap at each other. Luxray is fast, but Elekid is faster, weaving out of the way of Luxray's opening bite, and driving a brutal brick break into the Lynx's eye, trying to blind it. However, one thing Luxray has which Elekid lacks is bulk, darting a paw out to sweep the smaller electric type's feet. As Elekid's back hits the cold metal of the roof, Luxray unsheathes its claws and slashes down at its foe. Unable to dodge, Elekid throws up a Protect which knocks Luxray back, but this is a temporary reprieve, as in an instant the Gleam Eyes Pokemon is bearing down upon it once more. Zipping to its feet, Elekid counters this by kicking rainwater up in Luxray's face, but the Lynx responds by using Spark to turn the droplets into a conductor, zapping Elekid. Recognizing that the electrical portion of their duel has begun, Elekid howls its its name and unleashes a thunder attack, which in these conditions cannot miss. Despite this, Luxray does attempt to outrun the bolt, though this proves fruitless as the thunder changes course to strike it. The force of this attack knocks Luxray off its feet, and as it skids across the wet roof, Ash runs over to check on it. By the time he reaches it, however, Luxray is back on its feet, flaring its nostrils and readying itself for round 2. The two electric types then charge headlong at each other, slamming their heads together then breaking apart just as quickly. By now both Luxray and Elekid have taken on a yellow glow, as the amount of electricity they have absorbed is more than their bodies can contain. Recognizing this, both Pokemon begin channeling their power into a single point on their bodies. For Luxray it is its fangs, and for Elekid its fists. Due to the sheer amount of power these two Pokemon have absorbed, the electricity begins to take on shapes, with Luxray developing a giant spectral jaw made from electricity and lined with thunder fangs, while Elekid's fist takes on the appearance of a large yellow spiked gauntlet, several times the size of its normal hand. The two Pokemon's eyes then meet, and both electric types know that this will be the final move of the battle. Roaring in unison, Luxray and Elekid charge at each other one last time, then as one deliver their final attack, with Elekid's Thunder Punch clashing with Luxray's Thunder Fang. For a brief moment, the pair manage to create a closed circuit, but an instant later, this amassed power proves too great for either Pokemon to maintain, as with a bright yellow explosion, both Pokemon are blown into the air. Seeing that both are bound to fly off the roof, Ash takes a running leap, wrapping an arm around each and doing his best to cushion their landing as the three of them hit the muddy ground together. This impact knocks the wind out of Ash, but despite all their injuries, both Luxray and Elekid rise. Glowering at each other, the rival electric types make ready to resume their fight. Then as the clouds part to reveal the sunlight once more, Elekid is forced to take a knee. Moments later, Luxray falls forward as well, but the damage to Elekid's pride is already done, as like it or not, it was the first to show weakness. Rising to his feet and rubbing the spot where he hit the ground, Ash walks over to Luxray and Elekid, patting Luxray's head and thanking it for its help. The green-haired man then rushes over to begin siphoning off Elekid's electricity. However, to his surprise, when he points the decompressor at it, the gauge reads that it's completely drained. Smiling, the gym leader thanks Ash for his help, saying that the battle with Luxray really did the trick. Ash replies that he's just glad Floroma Town will be able to get back to normal, though he does wonder what will become of Elekid now. The leader replies that he doesn't know, but he can guess that it won't be welcome here in town after all the trouble it's caused. This causes a look of concern to cross Ash's face, and so kneeling down, he tells Elekid that if it wants, it would always be welcome on his team. Elekid weighs this choice carefully, its eyes flicking between Ash and Luxray. When it looks at the latter, cold fury crosses its face, and Ash can tell that it is not a Pokemon who takes defeat lightly. Finally, its gaze settles on Ash, and through gritted teeth, it buzzes something in the affirmative. However, this is not the excited tone of an eager new comrade. Instead, it sounds like Elekid is saying that it will serve Ash, but only in order to gain the strength he and Luxray have exhibited here today. Either way, Ash is happy to have Elekid join him, and so with a smile big enough for both of them, he taps it on the head with a Pokeball, adding it to his team. And that's where we'll leave things. What adventures will Ash and Elekid have together? How will Paul's defeat change his outlook on training? And who is the mysterious green-haired gym leader? Find out as the journey continues.